Number 8. Sir Bruce Ingham. Imagine your friend has arrived back from a trip abroad and he's brought you a gift. Aw, how considerate. But wait, what the hell is he handing over? Actually, handing over is about right, because the present is an actual hand. This was the bizarre situation that Sir Bruce Ingham found himself in when his friend Howard Carter gave him a mummified appendage. Carter was the famous archaeologist who in 1922 took a peek inside the Egyptian tomb of Tutankhamun. This notable pharaoh had been sealed away in a Valley of the King's burial chamber and may well have thought that he'd stay that way for all eternity. The British, however, had other plans, though they came to regret their arguably unwise move. It's said a curse was placed on the men who entered the tomb that year. The terrible affliction followed them and apparently killed some of them, which is the subject of this video and what you want to hear about, right? How does Sir Bruce Ingham fit into all of this? We'll tell you. He didn't die or anything. We didn't want to go straight into the grim stuff, but some pretty weird stuff happened after he received the hand, which was intended to be used as a paperweight. Yeah, you heard that right. For starters, the bracelet in the hand, yes, it was all blinged up, carried a message. This reportedly read, "Cursed be he who moves my body. To him shall come fire, water, and pestilence." It didn't say anything about stopping documents from blowing off your desk. Either way, Sir Bruce Ingham wouldn't have a desk for much longer, as his house would go on to be consumed by fire. And if you think that sounds like a bad coincidence, wait till you hear what happened next. He had the house rebuilt, and then it was flooded. At that point, Ingham decided to ditch the paperweight before things got worse. Good plan. Number 7. Lord Carnarvon. That previous entry was a little spooky, but we know what you're thinking. What about the people who allegedly lost their lives as a result of the curse of Tutankhamun? Arguably the most prominent of these was George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon in northwest Wales, Great Britain. Also referred to as Lord Carnarvon, he passed away from blood poisoning. But was this related to Howard Carter's work in Egypt? Let's go over the gory details. He suffered a mosquito bite, not an unusual thing out in Egypt for sure. However, he then cut it open during a routine shave. Now, medical science would say he developed an infection and died, but others beg to differ. The Lord's death naturally made headlines, and no less a figure than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, got people's imagination spinning with his speculations. The media already featured wild stories about a curse, yet Conan Doyle went a stage further by suggesting unearthly forces in the tomb area had caught up with Lord Carnarvon and killed him. The Lord's status as the person who funded the excavation of King Tut surely put him in a prime position for retribution from the ghosts of ancient Egypt. Lord Carnarvon was at the Continental Savoy Hotel in Cairo when he died in 1923. Narrative tension was heightened when a story went around that the lights went out in the city on his passing. Did this happen or not? We can't say it did with any certainty, so let's focus on some other details. The mosquito bite has been described as severe. A severe mossy bite? This must have been some bug that got him, right? Was the mosquito actually a messenger of doom from the ancient pharaoh himself? We're being a bit lighthearted, of course, but how serious is the idea that Lord Carnarvon died from a curse? Not very, according to experts. They point to the fact that he wasn't too well to begin with, bite or no bite. Also, he reportedly developed pneumonia, and that's what got him. We're thinking pneumonia may not have been a weapon of choice for the ancient Egyptians back in the day. Number 6. Walter Brian Emery. The eerie excavation of Tutankhamun is rightly world famous, and the thing everyone thinks of when you mention ancient Egyptian curses. But there are other scary stories where folk have died in what some might say are alarming circumstances. Take Brian Emery, for example. He was a British Egyptologist who passed away from a stroke in Cairo in 1971. What had happened in the run-up to this tragic event? He recently been involved in an excavation in the area of Saqqara, a village in Giza that you may be familiar with through its featuring in a Netflix series about the archaeology there. Anyway, back in the 1970s, Emery had found a small statue of Osiris, which he took back to his abode with him. If you don't know who Osiris is, then prepare yourself, because they're the god of death. Would you take a statue of a deathly figure and put it where you were gonna sleep? It was reportedly a small statue, but even so, As an experienced Egyptologist, it seems Mr. Emery didn't heed such things and decided it should go along with him. He then became paralyzed down his right side, and his assistant discovered him in the bathroom. Emery was hospitalized, but sadly suffered another stroke a couple of days later. This one killed him. Terrible indeed, but apparently he loved Egypt and was buried there, so we're guessing that's what he would have wanted. Was it a sheer coincidence that his health failed not long after transporting the Osiris statue? It probably was, though the timing is bound to fuel speculation about vengeful forces coming to get people who interfere with the realm of the deceased. Number 5. Hugh Evelyn-White. Did you know that a lot of people involved with the excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb died following their work in Egypt? We're not talking of natural causes either. Over 20 died in total, making the case for a curse truly compelling. Is there sufficient evidence to claim this, or is the whole situation just a little overstated? Of course, explanations exist as to why these individuals passed away. We can't with any certainty state that these people were struck down by an alleged curse in one way or another. Yet when you look at a story such as that of Hugh Evelyn-White, you have to wonder whether there's something in it. Let's take a big pinch of salt and look into the circumstances in which he died. He's been described as one of the first to enter the pharaoh's tomb in 1922. 2 years on and he was no more. Hold on, a couple of years? If it was a curse that got him, it was taking its sweet time. Well, what actually happened was that Evelyn-White tragically took his own life, and some have drawn attention to the note he left, which read, "I've succumbed to a curse which forces me to disappear." This message was allegedly written in blood, though we won't become too lurid here, owing to the fact that a man has died and he should be shown respect. He died at his own hand by hanging in the city of Leeds in Yorkshire, England. Did he commit suicide because of the curse? And if so, how was it affecting him? Ultimately, we can't say, and experts have pointed to other details which may have resulted in his eventual demise. He'd reportedly suffered a major bereavement after a close friend of his passed away, a possible contributing factor to whatever his psychological state was at the time. Also, and rather interestingly, it isn't clear whether he was actually involved in the excavation itself, though he was definitely at the tomb. Those feeling terrible following their experience at Tuts' tomb may have been affected by ancient fungi. These molds came as a result of foodstuffs left in the chamber, part of the whole business of keeping the pharaoh in tip-top shape for his journey to the next world. Some experts have pointed out that this might be a key element behind the sheer number of deaths. Evelyn-White killed himself, so he doesn't fall into this category, especially if he didn't get up close and personal with the relics. That said, the idea of a curse grew in power due to the unfortunate circumstances that unfolded in the years following this momentous archaeological event. Number 4. Return of the Relic. Away from the claustrophobic terror of Tutankhamun's tomb is another story connected to a fearsome curse. This one is more up to date, coming as it does from the 21st century, and a desire to right a wrong caused by the light-fingered and unwary. In 2004, an artifact described as a carving or fragment with hieroglyphs on it was taken from Egypt to Germany by someone who went on to suffer various afflictions. The man ultimately died from cancer, but before that felt paralyzed, nauseous, and feverish. Was this connected to the artifact, or was the individual simply in poor health? The man's stepson wasn't going to take any chances. He believed strongly enough that a curse had been placed on the family, so he brought the ancient item to the Egyptian embassy in Berlin, who then sent it home. Better safe than sorry, though it isn't definitive proof that a curse existed. Would certainly scare us silly, though, we have to say. Number 3. Richard Bethel. Captain the Honorable Richard Bethel held the post of secretary to Howard Carter. When he died, he too was drawn into the web of conspiracy and the supernatural that had been weaved around the so-called curse of Tutankhamun. Bethel passed away at the Bath Club in Mayfair, London in 1929, sometime after the tomb had been excavated, of course, though his connection to the dig made headlines. Mention was made of fire at his home, though this was in fact arson committed by Bethel's footmen. Still, it was easy for some to assume that dark forces were at play. Bethel died after reportedly being smothered in his bedroom at the club, possibly another reason for suspicion to be raised about the curse. Whatever happened, Bethel was gone, and his demise took a toll on his father, who was the 3rd Baron of Westbury. Westbury being a town and parish in Wiltshire, England. Baron Westbury committed suicide in 1930 by jumping from the 7th floor of his apartment building. He was reportedly ill and devastated by the loss of his son. However, stories emerged that he was subject to the curse associated with Richard. This has been debunked as tittle-tattle, with the man's suicide note describing his inner torment, but not saying anything to do with ancient Egypt. Number 2. Titanic Mummy Theory. You'd think the story of the Titanic was straightforward. Tragic for sure, but also very much an earthly disaster. The ship accidentally rammed an iceberg, which sliced it open below the waterline. Cue panic, many deaths, and a movie by James Cameron. But did you know that an ancient Egyptian mummy may have had something to do with the terrible events that unfolded in 1912 out in the ocean? Part of the cargo on board the vessel was a wooden casket containing what was left of the Princess of Amun-Ra. Her death happened approximately a century and a half ago, and reports state that she was around before Jesus Christ. In the run up to the 20th century, this casket was purchased in Luxor when the area was being excavated. Who were the buyers? 4 wealthy young men who'd come all the way from England. It changed hands before winding up at the British Museum. It was moved there before an individual in America took interest. Trouble is, he had to get it across the Atlantic, and he needed a ship to travel on. Enter the ill-fated RMS Titanic. So maybe the mummy had a curse, and this resulted in the most famous maritime tragedy on record. Unlikely. In actual fact, the casket never went further than the British Museum. 2 imaginative English gentlemen named William Stead and Douglas Murray created a narrative of death and destruction around an object they saw at the museum. This was the lid of a casket connected to a figure known as the Princess of Amun. In addition to its fictional journey on board the Titanic, the supposedly cursed casket had other tales of misery attached to it, with whoever possessed it being at the mercy of a dark fate, leading to it changing hands frequently. All made up, of course. Why did Stead and Murray decide to spin this yarn? That's not entirely clear, though one thing was certain: this pair enjoyed causing a stir. There's one more twist in the tale that we need to tell you about. The Titanic part of the story wasn't entirely the author's doing. You see, William Stead was unlucky enough to be on the ship at the time, but he was on his way to a US peace conference in his capacity as a journalist. He did frighten passengers by talking about the mummy's curse, but the idea of a mummy actually being on board the vessel appears to have come later from other people, and media coverage confused the issue. Number 1. Howard Carter. Now, of all the people who might have fallen prey to the curse of Tutankhamun, Howard Carter was surely at the top of the hit list. It was his name linked to the discovery of the pharaoh's tomb. His efforts working for Lord Carnarvon led us to knowing the details of the king's final resting place in the Valley of Kings. Numerous people who were either with him or associated with him appeared to be stricken by the curse. It may surprise you to learn that Carter didn't seem to be bothered by anything of a supernatural variety. In fact, he passed away at his home in London almost 2 decades later. Granted, he was terminally ill with Hodgkin lymphoma, but can that be put down to a vengeful pharaoh who waited years before finally snuffing him out? We're not so sure about that. There's definitely some interesting details associated with ancient Egyptian excavations that might give you pause for thought, and to wonder if these curses are real. Overall, it's probably a fantastic story that will never have an ending, making it more and more powerful as the years go by. Thanks for watching. Are there any entries about the supposed curse of Tutankhamun, not to mention other ancient Egyptian curses, that you think we left out? Let us know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe, and see you soon.